Okay, now as I discussed some about the structure of an atom, in this video I am going to tell you the detailed study of the Rutherford alpha scattering experiment. That is, how he got the structure of an atom. In this experiment, he took a source of alpha particle which was kept in a lead box. Then that alpha particle passed through a slit which was made up of lead, and it struck the gold foil, thin gold foil, and again at the back there was a screen coated with zinc sulfide. Now let me elaborate. First of all, what is an alpha particle? An alpha particle is a positively charged helium nucleus. So if we remove 2 electrons from an helium atom, the nucleus that is left behind is known as the alpha particle. So we took a type of compound which constantly emits alpha particle from it. Now why it is kept in a lead box and the slit is also made up of lead? Because lead is a very good absorber of that alpha particles. So we want the alpha particles only to pass through this small hole and come and collide with the gold foil, and we want to note the path of those alpha particles, where they are going and striking at this screen. Because each and every alpha particle passing through the gold foil comes and strikes in this screen and shows a fluorescence. What is this fluorescence? Fluorescence means a scintillation. That is, have you ever seen, many of you have seen Jonaki poka? Jonaki. So what it is showing? A yellowish greenish yellow glow. Glowing and again coming down, glowing and again coming down. So that type of glow we can observe for each and alpha particle coming and colliding in this screen. And from those light, we can understand that where the alpha particles are coming and striking. So after performing this experiment, what was the 3 observations made? Number 1, 99% of the alpha particles went through the gold foil undeflected. I repeat, 99% of the alpha particles went through the gold foil undeflected. Undeflected means they went, struck the gold foil and went in the straight path and collided with the screen. So there was no deflection from the alpha particles. Collided the gold foil, but no deflection was there. Very few amount of alpha particles was deflected by a small angle. Very few. And about 1 in 10,000 alpha particles showed deflection more than 180-degree angle. That means they went, strike and came back with an angle more than 180 degree. And about 1 in 20,000 went, strike the gold foil and came back totally with an reverse direction. So from these 3 observations, what can we tell? Number 1, we can tell that most of the part of an atom is empty or vacant, because 99% of the alpha particles went through the gold foil undeflected. So when we will get a deflection, where there will be an obstacle in our path. Suppose we are throwing a ball, it will go in a straight path when there is no obstacle faced in the path by the ball. When we will show a deflection, suppose we are throwing a ball at the wall and we are throwing a ball through a curtain. If we throw the ball to a wall, we will get the ball directly towards us. And if we throw the ball through a curtain, the path of the ball will be deflected, but to a certain point. So from this we can tell that when the collision will be with a hard substance, with a substance with huge mass, then the ball will be coming back totally. And if the collision is with a very light substance, the mass is less, it is not rigid, then the collision will be very small. So from the third point, that about 1 in 20,000 alpha particle came back totally. So 1 also came back totally. That means we can tell that inside the atom there is somewhere a place where a huge mass is concentrated. So huge that the alpha particles are coming back totally towards the same direction from where it started. So from this only, as I told in the previous video, the 2 conclusions were made: the nucleus, the center with a huge mass with all the neutrons and protons, and the extranuclear part where the electrons are revolving. And while the electrons, as they are having a negligible mass, we consider the whole region where the electrons are revolving as vacant. And only the nucleus, a very small region where all the mass is concentrated, is a heavy thing. So whenever the alpha particles was going and colliding with the nucleus, they were suffering a heavy deflection. Now you see, what was the drawback of this Rutherford's alpha scattering experiment? Why? Actually, we got the basic structure of atom from the Rutherford's alpha scattering experiment, but the theory was discarded and we have to study the new theory, that is the Bohr's theory. Now, why the Rutherford's atomic model was discarded? The main drawback, which is very important, is that it could not define the stability of the atom. It could not define the stability of an atom. Why an atom is stable, that could not be defined by Rutherford. Rutherford explained the stability in its own way, but that was neglected or that was discarded. Why? He told that inside the atom there is a nucleus with many neutrons, that means there are many positive charges in the nucleus. And around the nucleus, electrons are revolving in different shapes. Isn't it? Now, according to Rutherford, there is a force of attraction between this positive charge and this negative charge. And this force of attraction is known as electrostatic force of attraction. So, a force of attraction which is experiment between electron and proton is known as electrostatic force of attraction. And we know that from physics that whenever any particle is moving in a circular path, it has a tendency to go outward, and that is known as the centrifugal force. So, all the electron revolving is having a force to move out of the orbit, and that is the centrifugal force. According to Rutherford, the electrostatic force of attraction was balanced by the centrifugal force and an atom is stable. But again, by a theory of physics, that is the theory of electrodynamics, it states that any charged particle, if it is in constant motion, it must lose some amount of energy. So you see, inside there is a nucleus and electron is a charged particle, and it is in constant motion. So according to the physics theory of electrodynamics, this electron should constantly lose energy, because being a charged particle it is in motion. So if it is losing energy, then the path should become smaller and smaller and smaller, and at a time it will come and collide with the nucleus. But it does not happen. Why this does not happen could not be explained by Rutherford, and so we will come to the theory, Bohr's theory. The structure of the atom was just as given by Rutherford. There is a nucleus at the center and the electrons are revolving in different paths. But only some postulates were changed by the Bohr, and Bohr explained the stability of an atom. How? He told, number one, electrons revolve around the nucleus. When I am telling this, I am telling very slowly. You can pause and again rewind and see, and you can write down the postulates that I am telling. I am not writing here. So, the first postulate given by Bohr was that electrons revolve around the nucleus in definite shells with definite energy. What is the key term here? Definite energy. So all the orbits that are present around the nucleus where the electrons are revolving are accompanied by a definite amount of energy, and that energy is fixed. The energy will not change for any electron, for any orbit. So the electrons that are revolving will neither gain any energy nor give away any energy. Now, if we provide energy from outside, then the electrons will absorb that excess amount of energy and they can move from a lower shell to a higher shell. When the source of the energy is removed, they again come back to their own shell. But when they are in a stable condition, they neither absorb energy nor radiate energy. In the higher class, this concept is only known as quantization of energy. In a simple form, I will make you understand what is this quantization. Have you seen staircases in your home? I think so all of you have seen. So what can we see in those staircases? There are definite steps, and from one step to another step we have to put our foot. Now if we want to place our foot in between the two steps, what will happen? We will fall down. Same as in case of atom. There are definite shells. In between there is no state where an electron can exist. In another way I can explain you that. Suppose you have to go to Shialda station and you have to come back again. And in this total process, you need 50 rupees. 25 to go and 25 to come back. But unfortunately, you have 40 rupees with you. So classical theory, the old concept, what they told? Okay, you cut a ticket with 25 rupees and go to Shialda. Now to return you have 15. In any way, suppose you can collect another 10 rupees in the path. Suppose up to Barakpur you went and then any of your relatives came and gave you 10 rupees. So you will collect it and so you can manage in that way. But the modern concept of quantization tells that until and unless you have the total 50 rupees, you will not even go out of your home. So you doesn't believe in any in-between place. Whenever you will have the complete amount of energy consumed, then only you can move out of your place and go to the next one. You cannot go to a middle way and you can stop. Like light, sound, they can go to a middle way and they can stop. But for electrons, there is the concept of quantization where there is no in-between path. So nucleus, around the nucleus, in different shells, electrons are revolving and they have a definite amount of energy and they neither gain energy nor lose energy in this state. So when the electron is in the first shell, K shell, it is their home. As we are stable in our home, the electrons are also stable in their own home. The first electron, number 1 electron cannot be in the third shell because it cannot afford that much amount of energy to go to the third shell. So its place is number 1. So it will be in number 1. And whenever that particular electron is in number 1, it will neither gain energy nor lose energy. So this is the main postulates of Bohr's theory, and in this way he explained the stability of an atom. So now we got the clear picture of the atom. Next I will tell about the electronic configuration of the atom. What is electronic configuration of atom? Electronic configuration means the arrangement of the electrons in different shells of the atom. Suppose sodium. Sodium's atomic number is 11. So how many electrons are there? 11 electrons are there. Now, how will I distribute these 11 electrons in the different shells? As I told, the maximum capacity of the first shell is 2. More than 2, there can be not more electron in the first shell. Then, in the next shell, the maximum capacity is 8. So in the next shell, more 8 electrons will go. And the last one will go to the third shell. So total 11 will be distributed into 2, 8, 1. That is the first shell 2 electrons, second shell 8 electrons, and in the third shell 1 electron. The last shell is always known as the valence shell, and the number of electrons in the valence shell is known as the valence electron. And these electrons only participate in different kind of reactions, and they take part in chemical bonding where the formation of the compounds will take place, and that we will learn in our next class. So if I come to the next topic, isotope and isobar. Before that I want to tell you two things. Atomic number and mass number. What is atomic number? Atomic atomic number is the number of protons in an atom. And as we know, atom is electrically neutral. So in an atom, the number of proton is equal to the number of electron. So actually atomic number is equal to number of proton. And as we know, proton and electron are same in number, so we can tell it is equal to the number of electron. And mass number is the summation of proton and neutron that is present inside the nucleus. What are isotopes? Isotopes are the atoms of the same element with same atomic number but different mass number. Suppose for hydrogen, there are three kinds of hydrogen. Where you see, when we write the number below hydrogen, this represents, we write any element with atomic number is Z, mass number is A. So we write Z at below and A at above. This is the representation. With any element, the atomic number goes at the below and mass number at the above. So you see for hydrogen, the atomic numbers are the same, but mass number is 1, 2 and 3. 21H is known as deuterium, 31H is known as tritium. So these are the different isotopes of hydrogen. Isotopes are always having similar chemical reactions because chemical reactions are shown by the element based on the atomic number. As atomic number is same here, so their chemical reactivity will be same. And isobar just the opposite thing. The atomic number is different but mass number is same. Isotope is atomic number same, mass number different. Isobar is mass number same, atomic number different. So this is about isotopes and isobars. The last thing that I want to tell you is the orbital diagram. Orbital diagram means the representation of each and every atom. Two I am showing, you can automatically understand. Suppose potassium, K. It is written 19 atomic number and 39 mass number. 1939 for potassium. So we have to represent the orbital diagram of potassium. How? We will draw the nucleus and we will write there K. Why K? Because we are representing potassium atom. Then we have to distribute these 19 electrons in different shells. We know in the first shell how many electrons will be there? 2. So we will give 2 electrons in the first shell. Next, how many electrons will be there? 8. So we will give here another 8. Next, how many electrons will be there? 8. Now here I want to tell you one thing. I told that by 2n square formula, in the third shell we can accommodate 18 electrons. But why we are putting here 8, that cannot be explained in this class, at least not up to 10. We will know that in detail in class 11 because it is a huge theory. You up to class 10 will remember, put in your head that after 2, only the capacity of the first shell is 2. From that, after that, we will be considering the maximum capacity as 8. Because up to class 10, we will know about the 20 elements, 1 to 20. From 21, we will not write the electronic configuration in this way. So up to 20 we will write, and up to 20 we will remember that after 2, the maximum capacity is 8. So again in the third shell it will be 8. And 19 is there, 18 was becoming another 1, and that 1 electron is in the valence shell. So this is the orbital diagram of potassium. So whenever you represent any atom in orbital diagram, we have to represent the electronic configuration and the distribution of the electrons in different shells by exactly the number as we are writing in the electronic configuration. So this is all about the atom, the subatomic particles, where they are located, how they are located, atomic number, mass number, orbital diagram, isotopes and isobars. The portion that I taught, based on that, I will give you some questions in the written form after this video. You try to solve all those things at home. For today, this is up to this much, and in the next class, we will start from the topic chemical bonding.